Welcome to Exploring A Course in Miracles. I'm Emily Perry with the Circle of Atonement, here with Circle founder Robert Perry. And today we are diving into the most fundamental question in our very existence, and that is, what are you? The Course says, what are you is the first question that was ever asked, which is so interesting. And it also says that a goal of the Course's curriculum is to give us the answer. In the introduction to Review 5 in the workbook, the Course says, this course was sent to open up the path of light to us and teach us step by step how to return to the eternal self we thought we lost. So, in today's discussion, the idea is to think about, how do we answer the question of what we are? Where did our answer come from? Who taught us what we are? And most importantly, how does A Course in Miracles answer that question for us? The Course has a very specific answer to the question of what we are. And it's an answer that, if we really let it in, can not only change how we see ourselves, but it can change how we see other people and how we can handle the times in which we live, and so much more. Before we get into our discussion, though, I do want to say that if you are new to A Course in Miracles or new to us here at the Circle, we have a free booklet called What is A Course in Miracles that will give you a clear and grounded introduction. You can find that at circleofa.org/start. So, Robert, we are calling this podcast Waking Up to What You Are. But let's start with the fact that we're still asleep. We tend to get our picture of who we are based on what the world tells us we are. So, how does the Course describe the identity that we seem to have, the identity that most of us are walking around every day with? How do we see ourselves here?
I think we know we see ourselves as human beings. We feel like we are a mind living inside a body, and that body is an integral part of us. We feel like we have flawed traits and limited abilities. We have an identity that we shape over our lives through our actions and our thoughts, and that identity in turn is shaped by what the world does to us, how people treat us, what our place is in the world, how the world sees us, and that we're carrying around this past that determines so much of who we are. We're carrying scars over what's been done to us. We're carrying guilt over what we've done to others. We're carrying pride over our achievements and our special place in the world. But all of that, I think we know. That's the sense of who we are that we walk around with.
The Course says that it was the ego that raised that first question that was ever asked, what are you? And so, if the question is, what are you? What is the Course's answer to that question? What is that eternal self that we thought we lost?
Well, the Course just lavishes so much beautiful language on trying to answer this question. It sees it as this tremendous secret that we need to learn. There's a great passage in the manual that says, is talking about acquiring psychic abilities. And it says, yet nothing he can do, meaning even discovering special powers, can compare even in the slightest with the glorious surprise of remembering who he is. It just suggests so much. So, what does the Course say? I think just about every spiritual path around these days talks about who you are and discovering who you are. And the Course does as well, obviously, but it has a somewhat different slant. I think very often we are told that, well, we are God, or we are the one self of all existence. And when we wake up to who we are, we discover we are everything. And the course's idea is similar but significantly different as well. Its idea is that our true nature is what it calls the Son of God, obviously Christian language. And we associate the Son of God, of course, with Jesus himself. The course says we are all the Son of God, or we are all the sons of God. It uses language on both sides. So we are each a son and we are each the Son. But as the Son of God, we are an eternal spirit, but significantly, rather than being God, we were created by God. And he created us not as physical beings in this world. He created us by extending his own being, his own spirit outward, and that became us. So that we are made, you could say, from his being. We possess all of God's attributes in the same measure as God does, which is an absolutely mind-boggling thing. Because he extended his own being in creating us, it means we're one with him. It means we're part of him. And it means, as I just said, that we have God's own attributes. So we have his perfection, we have his holiness, we have his limitlessness. And in our true nature, we don't have a body because we're boundless. We don't dwell in time, we're in eternity. And we don't have a personality in the usual sense, bunch of kind of partial, flawed, imperfect traits. We have God's traits. So the course has this idea that were we to wake up to who we really are, nothing could compare to the glorious surprise of remembering that. We would be in this transcendental, infinite state, but we would still be the Son of God rather than God himself.
Remember a couple of years ago, I got a little obsessed with this topic. I did a Sunday gathering sermon about it. I talked your ear off about our true identity. And I kept going back to the beginning of lesson 224 in the workbook, where it says, "My true identity is so secure, so lofty, sinless, glorious, and great, wholly beneficent, and free of guilt, that heaven looks to it to give it light." And I just was thinking about this idea like heaven looks to our true identity to give it light. What a glorious, magnificent concept. And yet, it's so hard to get in touch with that in our everyday experience. I remember taking a walk with a friend of mine a few years ago, and I was telling her about this idea, and she was like, "I just don't feel like that at all." And I think that's how we go through our days. On one hand, if you've been in this work long enough, you have some sense that who the world and who the ego says you are isn't real. And yet it's hard to get in touch with what the course says we are.
It's so different from our experience. Yeah. Yeah. And obviously, it's not uncommon for people to have direct experiences that the course would say was an experience of who they really were or experience of like getting there, approaching there. Um, but for most of us, it's a theory, right? It's a teaching, and we're trying to get on board with it.
It's an interesting point that you just made because there are some ways in which we feel like we can touch it if you have a really lofty meditation experience, for example. You can kind of get in touch with what it's talking about in relation to our true identity, but how do we feel it more in the here and now?
I mean, that's kind of the whole path of the course, and it does provide specific means like meditation. Um, but I think that for the most part, when we hear that teaching, we don't hear it as it's meant because you're talking about how different it is from our experience. Because it's so different from our experience, I think we just unconsciously assume that we're not the Son of God now. Like we know who we are now, we assume, right? And so if that's not the Son of God, then we are not the Son of God now. So we assume we need to get there. We need to become that again. And what I've often encountered in course students is you assume, or spiritual students, you assume you are this ego, or you assume you are this lower self, and you have a higher self somewhere tucked away or somewhere up there. Or oftentimes course students will believe, well, they're an illusion and they have this true identity that's somehow connected to them, but it's distant, or they believe they once were this true identity. And all of that means that you need to sort of grow and change to become it again. You make yourself holy enough, you make yourself spiritual enough, and then you can kind of sort of merge with it. Helen, what comes to mind is Helen had this inner vision of being the ancient priestess or seeing an ancient priestess. And this priestess was so holy and so purely non-judgmental and loving that Helen said she went over to her side and tried to merge with her unsuccessfully. And I feel like how she was describing that priestess is kind of how we see our true identity as God's son. Like, okay, it's there, and if only I could sort of go over to its side and merge with it, I'd be there again too.
I think that's a really good example, Helen and the priestess, because from what we know about Helen and her own descriptions of herself, I mean, she's very much like us with her neuroses and her ego tendencies. And yet she also had extraordinary spiritual experiences up to and including this holy priestess. And so I think that is how we tend to look at ourselves, which creates this split in our mind, where on one hand, we know that there must be some sleeping son of God in us. And yet it's just so outside the realm of our everyday experience. But the Course merges those. The Course says, no, even in the midst of your everyday experience, you are still a son of God. So talk to us about that idea. It's not like we're here and our true self is there. The Course says, no, your true self is with you at all times. So help us unpack that.
I think to really get that, we first have to understand how we can be something that is different from how we experience ourselves. That there can be a difference between how I currently feel I am and what I really am. And I think the explanation for that is that we all know we can experience ourselves as we are not, just in normal mundane terms. I mean, we know this about, especially about other people in our lives. You think about any person in your life, and you can probably think of ways in which you see them as somewhat wrong about themselves, right? Maybe they think they're really good at something and they're not, right? Um, and so we all carry around the experience of people can be wrong about themselves. And the Course just takes that principle, I think, and stretches it to the nth degree so that the gap between what you think you are and what you are is much, much, much greater. Like I mean, I've seen those talent shows on TV where someone gets up and performs a song and they are terrible, but they think they're the best in the world practically. And the Course is saying, well, that gap, take that gap, but in that person between what they are and what they think they are, and just stretch it, far beyond what you can imagine. And then you have the fact that we can be something like the Son of God while we think we are this human being in the world. And the Course's explanation for that difference is using various psychological mechanisms. Okay. We all know about the idea of being delusional. Well, the Course says you are the Son of God, but you're delusional. We all know about amnesia, where you're still yourself, but you forget yourself. And the Course talks about us falling into what it calls the great amnesia. We all know about forgetting things. The Course says you have forgotten what you are. It talks about, as you've mentioned, being asleep. And sleep is a great, I think, analogy or metaphor, because when you're asleep, you can believe you can experience all kinds of weird things about you can conceivably using there's an old kind of Chinese philosophy metaphor. You could conceivably imagine in the dream that you're a fish or you're a butterfly, but obviously that's just the dream while you're asleep. The Course talks about it's as if we're drugged. And so all these different psychological mechanisms are ways of saying that you can be the Son of God now, but you can still experience yourself as being this flawed, limited, body bound human, both at the same time.
I think your example of the person who goes on the talent show and they think they're so great, but they're not, is actually the reverse of what the Course is asking us to see. The We go through our days thinking that we're so much smaller than the Course says that we are. So it would be like somebody coming on to the stage and thinking they can't sing and they sound like an angel. And that's the disconnect. The example that comes to my mind is I have a friend who is or was anorexic, and she just absolutely could not see in the mirror what we all saw when we were looking at her. She was beautiful, and she didn't see herself that way. And so it's almost like the less she ate and the more distorted her image became in the mirror to us. The I mean, sorry, I'm not explaining this very well, but that's
Yeah,
the
yeah, but
idea.
we get it. That's a
You
good
get it.
analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she was seeing herself as completely different than how we all saw her. And that is how the Course is looking at us. We look in the mirror and we see this broken image. We got some good qualities, we got some bad qualities, but we tend to mainly focus on the bad qualities. And the Course is saying, no, no, you are a perfect shaft of pure light. And so I love this idea. And I remember when we did a class on this, that concept of you are not broken ego identity here walking around on earth and beautiful perfect shaft of light somewhere else. It's all here within you now. You are looking out from these eyes as a son of God. I remember that made a big impression when we had the class. And if we could actually go through our days understanding that this is the truth of who we are and we can be in touch with it now, we can have completely different days. And I did touch on this in the introduction that we could go through our days entirely differently. We could see ourselves differently, see other people differently, handle the little and the big betrayals and challenges and frustrations that come at us, handle the world as it is right now differently, walk with your head more held high as we go about the busy
Mhm.
doings of dealing with and changing this place. So what all of that to say this, what would change in our everyday if we could actually get in touch with who we are as God created us and make that the lens from which we view ourselves here?
Well, that I'd like to before getting to that, I want to back up just a bit because you talked about that thing that was impactful for people in that class from last year. And I want to just expand upon that a bit because that's been for me the crucial idea. And the idea goes like this. In each of us, there is an I, or I'll say a you, quote unquote, YOU. There is a you that is looking out through your eyes, that is hearing the sounds that come to your ears, that is thinking your thoughts, that is feeling pain if your body is in pain, that feels your body sit in the chair. This you makes mistakes, right? And often experiences the consequences of those mistakes. This you wonders if it can ever become the Son of God. This you is trying to walk the path of the course. In other words, it's you. Okay. And what we do is we unconsciously assume that that me, that you, obviously is not the Son of God, right? And needs to get to the Son of God, walk over to its side and merge with it, like with Helen and the priestess. But the Course is saying that that very you who looks out through your eyes, who thinks your thoughts, who feels your feelings, who makes mistakes, right? Who goes through pain, who feels fear, who feels the chair underneath their body right this second. That very you is the Son of God, just the Son of God not knowing itself, right? In a state of sleep, in a state having what you might call delusions of littleness, which is the opposite of delusions of grandeur, like you were talking about with the talent show, right? So the key thing is to realize that we just automatically, without knowing it, separate those two things, right? The Son of God and the you that looks out through your eyes, makes your choices, feels your pain, et cetera, et cetera. And the Course is saying, no, that you is the Son of God. You just can't, there is no mirror to look back and see you. So you're lost in all these thoughts about what you are, okay? But you never get to see the you that's lost in those thoughts. And to think that that very me, I'll say, looking out from these eyes is God's perfect Son. And I just need to let the scales fall off my eyes and just realize who I already am, always have been. What an astonishing message.
Yeah, and that's where we get into, again, these two ideas as true. On one hand, we do have to develop and grow, but we're developing and growing to uncover the truth of who we already are. And
Right,
and
right.
so on one hand, yes, we have to learn the lessons that the workbook is teaching us and do the practice that the workbook is giving us. But at the end of the day, it's meant to take the scales off our eyes so that we can see truly. And that's the goal of the course. That's the goal it calls vision, true perception. The work, the growth is getting us to see what's already real.
Yeah. And just as an aside, one thing you and I always talk about is we still need to do the work or we're going to stay asleep. And in the Course, I mean, in many paths that I encounter these days, the goal is you just kind of have the awareness, the awakening to who you are, and then presumably everything else takes care of itself. All the stuff in your mind, your personality, your ego, it all kind of gets taken care of if you can just be in that state. And I think the Course would say, first of all, it doesn't all just get taken care of. You still have to work to unravel all that stuff that's accumulated in your mind, all those false beliefs, all that ego stuff. Just being in that awake state is not going to automatically undo it all. Instead, you're going to walk around thinking you are awake, and we're all going to see you basically displaying a lot of ego patterns. The other thing I think the Course would say is if you really were in that awake state, your body literally could not remain. Your body would shine out in light if you were really in that fully awake state. Because from the Course's standpoint, this world is dreamland. You can only be in this world if you're asleep and dreaming. So I just wanted to I know this is a bit of an aside, but I just wanted to put an exclamation mark on your statement about we still have to do the work.
And at the same time, I want to come back to that idea of if we do hold this idea of we are as God created us right now, We don't have to grow. I'm thinking about what the course teaches in relation to soul. Like your soul is the same as it ever was and will be. It doesn't go through this process of growth. And so understanding that what we're doing here in these bodies is dissolving our ego, and that takes a lot of work. And yet, at the core of our invisible divine reality is who we are as God created us. And we can go through each day differently if we understand what that is and the implications of knowing the truth of who we are. And so let's get into that. What would change in our everyday if we really got this?
I think everything would change. I mean, there's so much we can talk about from the course here, but I think one thing that would change, I'll just mention two things. There's a quote that you already referenced that I love, which says, "Walk you in glory with your head held high and fear no evil." I think if we realize that we were the changeless Son of God already, and changeless means nothing can hurt you. If we realize that nothing could hurt us, then we would fear no evil. We'd fear nothing, right? And to be relieved of fear is like massive. Like every living creature on this earth walks around in fear because we're all so easily damaged in this world. The next thing I want to mention, I
Well,
know
hold on,
we
let me
have
just
other,
pause
yeah.
there. What would you say to someone who's listening and thinking, what is Robert talking about? Of course, we can be hurt in this world.
Well, the Course acknowledges that our bodies can be hurt in this world. That's true. But there's that amazing section in the text called the message of the crucifixion, which says that what Jesus was trying to teach in the crucifixion was even though his body could be hurt and be destroyed, who he was invulnerable. There's a great line that says, "Teach rather your own perfect immunity." So who he was perfectly immune, even if his body could be hurt. And we tend to feel two hurts in this world. We feel the hurt to our body, and then we feel our ego being bruised, right? We feel like our very identity has been damaged and needs tending to and needs medicine and band-aids and so on. Um, and from the course's standpoint, when our bodies hurt, we don't need to experience the sense of my identity has been hurt.
Got it.
So the next thing is that the course says that we have a basis, if we remember who we are, for just unlimited self-esteem. And we all know these days that everybody wants self-esteem. We want to esteem ourselves. Uh, we're always searching for that. And the course essentially says that we're trying to esteem the wrong self, right? We're trying to esteem the person we think we are in this world. So we're trying to feel good about our body and feel good about our abilities and feel good about our place in society and so on, feel good about our ego. And if we can move our sense of self-esteem to that Son of God that is who's actually looking out through these eyes and making these choices and et cetera, then our self-esteem can be off the charts and can be invulnerable,
Mm-hmm.
where it can't be hurt.
Well,
Now,
yeah, I
that's
want
no
to.
small gift.
Oh my gosh, that's one of the greatest gifts we can have here because I'm thinking about the question that I asked earlier of, well, where do we get our sense of self? And we tend to get our sense of self based on what the world tells us that we are. And the world is built on ego goals. Are you pretty enough? Are you wealthy enough? Are you powerful enough? And so if you look to ego goals to teach you who you are, then you're always going to be in choppy water. You're always going to be standing on really shaky ground because those are things that just go up and down. But if you put your sense of self in who God says that you are, then you're resting on something that is eternal and never goes up and down. And so when you look out and you see a world that just looks crazy all the time, and if you hook into the craziness, doesn't mean that we don't have things to do here, but if you hook into the craziness, then your sense of self is going to go up and down based on what the world is doing to you. But if you hook your sense of self into what God says is true about you, then you can go through the craziness entirely differently. There's a line in the course that I really like. It says about the ego that the ego is the stranger that has entered into your mind. It's not the truth of who you are. And the course says, ask not this transient stranger, who am I? He is the only thing in all the universe that does not know. So we look to the ego and we say, tell us what we are. And the ego is more than happy to do that. But the ego's answers are always going to make us unhappy. And from a course perspective, it's insanity to look at something unreal, and the ego is unreal in the course. It's insanity to look at something unreal to tell us what is real.
Yeah. And there are a few passages in the course where we're supposed to realize that when it comes to who knows who we are, like, do we think we know better than God? We need to trust, we need to take his word for what we are.
Yeah, there's all that great teaching on the mix up between arrogance and humility that we make. Like
Hmm.
we think it's arrogant to say, we're created wholly beneficent and heaven itself looks to us to give it light. And the course says that it's actually humility when you understand that you're not saying that about yourself. It's God who's saying that about you. And it's arrogant for you to say, God doesn't know the truth of who you are. So if you have
And
an
you know
opinion
better.
of, yeah, if you have an opinion of yourself that's different than God's opinion of you, that's what's arrogant. And I
Yeah.
love those course reversals. So just moving on here, one of the perennial hangups that we have in terms of our identity is our sense of worth. Again, the world is all too willing to tell us what we're worth and to build our sense of worth around ego things like how much money we have and how powerful we are. Those are what the world values as worth. But it's so comforting. It's one of the more comforting teachings in the course that it says that God establishes our worth. And so say more about that idea that we don't have to look to the world to determine what we're worth. We just have to believe what God says we're worth.
That's such a freeing idea. Uh, we are trying to establish our worth all the time, through what we say, through what we do, through what we achieve, through how well we perform, and through getting the world to approve of us and grant us importance and tell us we're special. There are some great quotes in the course about how we don't have to do any of that because God already established our worth when he created us, and that can't change. So a favorite quote among many course students is, your worth is not established by your teaching. And then later in the same section, he says, nothing you do or think or will or make. And it continues, your worth was established by God. I love that quote. And you and I the other day were practicing this great line from chapter 8 in the text that said, but you could not make yourself unworthy because you are the treasure of God. And while we were practicing that idea, I thought, okay, so if I really believe that nothing I've ever done could make me unworthy because I'm the treasure of God. God looks at me and says, there's my treasure, right? And that can never change. If I really believe that, sort of the relaxation that would come from that, the sense of, oh, thank God I've arrived, would be just enormous. We could get off the hamster wheel. We could stop feeling like, unless we keep running and running and running, what little worth we have is going to collapse. We could realize, hang on, it's not anything I do. It's what God did when he created me.
That quote, your worth is not established by your teaching, your worth was established by God. I know you didn't mention this, but I know that that was directed at Bill because Bill was nervous to teach a class, and Jesus is stepping in and saying, don't let what the students think of you determine what you think of yourself. And there it is, right? We have so many different ways in which what other people think of us determines what we think of ourselves. I can relate to your worth is not established by your teaching. Before I came here, I did a million presentations. I do a million presentations here. They're just different forms. But when you're on stage at a corporate event, for example, if you nail it, you just feel like, okay, I'm flying, I'm worth something. And then if you bombed it, which I've done plenty of times as well, then you just feel an inch tall. And so again, here you are, if you hook your self-esteem into what's going on in the world, you're always going to go up and down based on how you performed or whatnot. And if you can just go through the day saying my worth is established by God, then you're just anchored into something so much deeper. Do you want to say anything more about this idea
Just,
before we move on?
just well, my old metaphor from my childhood days with my dad in the YMCA of the egg and spoon race.
Oh,
Where
yes.
where you're. I think everyone knows what this is. Where
Not
you're having a
everyone. It's
race at
always
a
worth telling
picnic.
one more time.
Okay, you're at a picnic and you're having a race, and everyone's got an egg on a spoon. And the idea is you got to see who can finish first without dropping and breaking your egg. And what so the idea is you have to run as fast as you can, but not so fast that your egg falls off the spoon and breaks in the grass. And I still have memories of those egg and spoon races, but that's life, isn't it? It's like the egg is our worth. And we need to like run as fast as we can, but in the process, try not like we're nervously running because at any second, we know that egg's liable to drop off and break.
Well, I know I've been teasing you, but that is such a perfect analogy because first of all we do in an egg and spoon race is like take care of our egg. Meanwhile, we're racing against other people. So we're paying close attention, we're honed in on our egg, and we're trying to get across the finish line faster than everyone else who's also honed in on their egg. And also it works because an egg is such a fragile thing. It's
Mm-hmm.
so fragile. It, you know, falls an inch and it cracks, and there you go. And our egos are like that too. You know, they're so fragile and they crack so easily. And so we have to just focus on them for our whole life because it's so delicate and we're so attached to it as our identity.
And that makes us anxious every day.
Completely. Yeah. So get out of the egg and spoon race and get
Yeah.
into your understanding your worth as God created you. Just
The
the only
course's
way to
image,
win
I
is not
know.
to play the game, right?
Yeah, right.
So get out of the egg and spoon race with your life. What were you
But
going to say?
I know we need to move on, but the course has this image of our reality as this star in God's mind lifted high above the earth. And the idea of, the feeling that imparts is nothing that happens on this earth can affect that star, right? No one thinks that if we have some war raging on earth, that affects the stars that we see in the sky. And that's a great metaphor for our identity and for our worth. Our worth is like that star lifted high above the earth, affected by nothing that happens in the universal rat race or egg and spoon race down here.
If we understand who we are as God created us, we can understand that our worth is not determined by what the world values and what other people think about us. And then attached to that is this idea that we're guilty. And the lesson of the course is God's son is guiltless. and we are guiltless in our invisible divine reality. And so, talk to us about that idea and what it would mean to go through our days understanding that we're guiltless.
Sure. One of the things that's helped me with this concept is guilt feels like a case where I did something wrong, I did something hurtful towards someone else. And in the process, it feels like that boomeranged back and actually changed who I am. Guilt feels like a case where your actions have stained or tarnished who you are. The Course talks about feeling like there's tarnish and rust on that level of who we are. And what the Course is saying is that, well, yeah, you can do things that are intentionally hurtful. Let's not kid ourselves about that. Like we can always say, well, I was just doing my best and I was just trying to find love. And, no, we
I
do
was
hurtful
afraid.
things. I was afraid, right? We can do things that were intended to hurt. But the Course says for those things to come back and change or stain or corrupt or tarnish who we are with guilt is impossible because we don't have that kind of power over who we are. God created who we are. And so, the idea is if we could change that, God would be mocked. But God is not mocked. The holiness he created in us can't be changed by our actions. And so there's a great line where the Course says in lesson 152, we lay aside the arrogance which says that we are sinners, guilty and afraid, ashamed of what we are, and lift our hearts in true humility instead to Him who has created us immaculate. And the idea is He not only created us immaculate, but that is a changeless reality. So our actions can't go in there and make us unimmaculate.
You just touched on my all-time favorite course teaching there. God will not be
Mm,
mocked.
hmm
We tend to think of it as God's going to come after us because we're so sinful. And in the
Yeah.
course, God will not be mocked means you can't escape the sinlessness that he gave you. And what if we really could go through each day understanding that idea? I Guilt is one of those topics where, and we've said this before, where I don't think we go through our everyday in touch with how guilty we really feel. I don't
Oh, we
think
don't.
guilt is something that, unless you've just truly done something that has wrecked your life and caused you unspeakable pain, and you're very in touch with that thing that you did, I don't think we go through our days feeling all that guilty. And famously, with the beginning of my tenure here at the Circle, I told Robert that I just wasn't in touch with guilt, and he called it a failure of introspection. And I've thought about that ever since because I think if we really did uh, some self-inquiry, we would be more in touch with how guilty we feel. The course talks about how every loveless thought and every loveless act deposits guilt into our unconscious. And so if you really think about that, like, we got a lot of guilt in there because we do a
Mm.
lot of loveless things all day long.
And
And
thinking.
yeah, loveless things and loveless thoughts. Um, and so it's two things again, right? So, on one hand, we accumulate a lot of guilt in our mind, consciously and unconsciously, and we are guiltless in our invisible divine reality. And so, understanding the truth allows us to hold our head high and walk through this world in glory. And so we can see the guiltlessness within ourselves. And importantly, we can see the guiltlessness, the ultimate guiltlessness in other people. And now we start to have different relationship with ourselves and other people. And now we're starting to get into the healing of relationship and the healing of our world that results. So guiltlessness is one of those things that I don't think, again, I don't think we go through our days like, wow, I feel really guilty today. But at the same time, if we were in touch with it, and we more importantly, if we were in touch with our lack of it, then we could have different days.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think some people are more in touch with it than others. Some people are more consciously crippled by it. But yeah, I think that the course would like us to get more in touch with our guilt and also like us to realize it's delusional. The course says, I got a quote here, um, guilt is always totally insane and has no reason. If we can get in touch with the arrogance of guilt, the arrogance of thinking we could sully what God created, that would be massive.
Mm, I know we got to move on. I just want to say one thing. People who are more in touch with their guilt have what I call guilt buttons. And if you push on their guilt button, you can cause them to do the things that you want them to do. So all you have to do is make them feel guilty, push on their guilt button, like, well, you did this to me, and they'll respond accordingly. They'll do the thing that you want them to do. But
It's like our pro tip from this podcast.
the reason, yeah, hack, human hack. But if you understand the reason why we push on guilt buttons is because we want people to stay. We want people to stay in our lives. We want people to give us what we want. We want people to love us. And so we make them feel guilty, and we're hoping that that pours the love out. But if you understand who you are, then you don't have all that need to make them be different to fill your needs, because you understand that, as you are, you have no ultimate needs. And again, that's part of going through life differently with more strength, because you understand who you are. You're not constantly trying to manipulate other people to meet your needs. I'll just say
Well,
that. No more.
conversely, where I thought you were going is if you don't have those guilt buttons, who can control you?
Well, okay, yeah, that too. So you're not only like pushing on people's guilt buttons to get them to do what you want, but you don't have the ability for them to push on you to
Yeah.
make you do what they want. Yeah, good point. Okay. So often when we think of who we are in this world, we think of these negative qualities like, I'm worthless, I'm guilty. But we also build our identity on these things that the world values as good. So if we're feeling guilty, then we're feeling low and depressed or anxious. But if we're feeling like, oh, I'm nailing it here on planet Earth, then we get our ego puffed up, and then our identity gets hooked into how great we are. And so while the course is asking us to be on the lookout for guilt and shame and bending to other people's opinions, it wants us also to look out for the ways in which we can get hooked into great, grandiosity, as it calls. So talk about that idea.
I think the idea that, well, the idea that really strikes me is that in several places, the course talks about our lists of attributes that we ascribe to ourselves, or our list of descriptive terms we apply to ourselves. And the understanding is that those lists are full of negative ones and full of positive ones, and that we need to realize that the whole list doesn't describe who we really are. So in lesson 35, for instance, which is my mind is part of God's, I'm very holy, we identify these terms we apply to ourselves based on how we take part in different situations. And a list of example terms is imposed on, depressed, failing, endangered, helpless, but also victorious, virtuous. So there's negative ones and positive ones. And then in that lesson, we're supposed to negate all of them by saying, but my mind is part of God's, I am very holy. So the notion is that we describe ourselves based on how we take part in this physical environment, but we're supposed to realize our true environment is the mind of God. And in that environment, based on that environment, we are very holy. And then likewise, lesson 94 talks about us to lay self-images aside, to go past the long list of attributes both good and bad you have ascribed to yourself, and wait in silent expectancy for the truth of who you are. So the notion there is that we don't negate specifically each and everything on the list, like in lesson 35. Here we call to mind the whole list and we just put the whole thing aside. We realize that whole list of all those ways we describe ourselves in our head is incorrect. And having sort of dumped that list, we have a meditation in which we wait in silent expectancy for the experience of who we are. But in both of those lessons, we're basically taking all that normal self talk about I'm this, I'm that, I'm so stupid, I'm amazing, I'm so good. And we're just realizing the whole list is false. It doesn't describe the Son of God who's actually the one looking out through these eyes.
I love that point because we try and talk ourselves out of the ego pit by pulling ourselves up into the ego heights. And
Exactly.
and so if we can just again get out of that game altogether and understand that from a course perspective, neither one of them have a lot of value, then we can get into what the course says does have value, which is our true identity. And I would encourage anyone to go into the app. We have a free app, acimce.app, and do a search for the word identity and just see what comes up around it as you're described in your true nature. I want to read a passage from a story that our story project leader, Sue Pearson, wrote because Robert and I both felt that this was an example of exactly what we're talking about, where someone is facing truly tragic, difficult life circumstances, but navigates through based on an understanding of the ideas that we're talking about in this podcast. In this story, Sue wrote about where she discovered in her first marriage years and years and years of infidelity by her husband. And she was in such agony that she said she thought she would die. And Sue writes that after several nights without sleep, she had this experience where she felt the direct presence of God. And this is Sue's language. She says, it's nearly impossible to describe in words what was being communicated, but I could feel God telling me how spectacular I was, how awesome, a holy, innocent, beautiful spirit. I felt his deep love and appreciation and gratitude for me, and I returned this love to him. We were together as one. The exchange was so playful and filled with joy. God did not acknowledge my pain. He knew that love is the great healer, and he gave me that gift. And it almost sounds NDE like we read so many
It
NDEs
does.
on this podcast, but here Sue is in her own words just agony, and God steps in and says this pain isn't the truth of who you are. And it was very healing for her, and that's it, right? Like that's no matter what we're facing in this life, we can go through with our head held high because we understand what's ultimately true.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, Robert, the course says that if we knew who we are, who we really are, we would have one mood. Tell us about what that one mood is in the course.
Well, I'll read the quote that we're getting that from. It talks about the Holy Spirit and the ego, and it says that they are in fundamental disagreement about everything because they are in fundamental disagreement about what you are. The ego's beliefs on this crucial issue vary, and that is why it promotes different moods, as if our mood at any given moment is based on what we're thinking we are at that moment. So the ego promotes different moods because it's promoting different views of who we are. And then it goes on to say the Holy Spirit never varies on this point, the question of what you are. And so the one mood that he engenders is joy. So if our mood is based on our picture at that moment of what we are, and if we have an unvarying picture of what we are, and it's the Holy Spirit's picture of what we are, then we will have an unvarying mood of pure joy.
This is the kind of stuff in the course that I just dork out on because I love the idea that the course, when the course talks about moods, it says if you're in a bad mood, then you can look and see where you've behaved lovelessly to someone else. So if you're in a bad mood, it's not just because you're in a bad mood from a course perspective, it's because you behave lovelessly to someone else. And that unconscious guilt is in your mind now. But if you're in this place where you understand who you are, then you have one mood, which is joy. And we're always searching for joy. We're always looking for happiness. And so here we have this practical answer of how you get it. Know who
Yeah.
you
And
are.
I I think it's really good that you brought in that passage about if you're in a bad mood, it's because you thought or reacted unlovingly towards somebody else. And the implication in that passage is when you react that way towards them, that circles back and kind of damages or darkens your picture of yourself. And then out of that darkened picture of yourself, your mood is something less than joy. And so if you carry that the Holy Spirit's picture of yourself, your mood will always be one of joy, which is truly astonishing.
As we close here, I one of the questions that we always get after we do these podcasts and have these discussions is, "That's great, Robert and Emily, but how do I actually do this?" And so I did want to add in that the course gives us 365 workbook lessons, and we're meant to practice the workbook. We're meant to repeat these ideas in our mind. And as we do, we embed them in our thoughts. And so we're more able to respond to what happens in the world with light if we have gone through the practice of embedding that light in our mind. And so a few lessons in the workbook that are worth noting for the purposes of what we've been talking about today is lesson 35. My mind is part of God's. I am very holy. Lesson 94, 110 and 162. I am as God created me. Lesson 97. I am spirit. And lesson 191. I am the Holy Son of God Himself. There's so many other lessons I could give you. I didn't even mention my favorite 224. But one thing I want to say here with these lessons that I've just shared is that they're not affirmations that you're trying to convince yourself are true. The way the lessons are presented, they are descriptions of what is already true. So my mind is part of God's. I am very holy. I am as God created me. I am spirit. I am the Holy Son of God Himself. So we're trying to embed that idea as reality now in our mind. And the last thing I'll say on this is there's just a gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous section in the workbook, what we call the what is sections. It's called What Am I? And in that section, you'll find this beautiful language. If you ever want to know how the Course sees you in your true identity, go to What Am I? That section begins with I am God's Son, complete and healed and whole, shining in the reflection of His love. And then it goes on from there. But if you
Can I
ever
just
are
say,
shaky in your true identity, go to What Am I? Or one of those workbook lessons that I just shared. Yeah, of course.
there's this great lesson, 67, Love Created Me Like Itself, that wants us to remember that love created me like itself, like 5 or 6 times an hour. Why? Because we are so preoccupied with false self images. So we've had a lifetime of practicing in a pretty consistent way who we are not. And so we need to replace that with a lifetime of consistently and in varied ways practicing who we are. It's not just a light switch.
If this conversation sparked something in you and you want to learn more about the course, then just a reminder, Robert and I host weekly classes just like this inside our Course Companions program. And you can learn more about that at coursecompanions.com. On behalf of all of us here at the Circle, thank you so much for watching and listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.